Hey guys, my name is Jay Wilson. I'm a freelance consultant through my company Onyx Reporting. I'm so stoked you guys joined me today. After the Domo Idea Exchange conference that I ran 2 weeks ago now, um, one of the participants, another consultant, came up to me and said, "Hey Jay, I would love to talk to you some more about some of the things you covered in your sessions." And I said, "Of course, I'd be happy to." And so Milan and we kind of met up for about 45 minutes or so, and we just talked about data and dashboard and ETL optimization in Domo. Because while Domo is a very powerful product and does a lot of optimization for you, they don't always make it super transparent some of the things that we can do on our own to make our environment a little faster. So while you're watching this video, check the description. I'll include chapter markers to like different topics where we were talking about certain things so that you can navigate and get to the stuff you're interested in. Also, while I love making these YouTube videos to help educate the Domo community, I also have to pay the bills. So, little shameless plug. All the stuff that you're going to hear me talk about in this video is consulting work that I do for customers. So if you're interested in having a dashboard go faster, or you want to understand how you can build more performant ETLs or leverage magic better, or set your environment up so that more users are happy to adopt the Domo product that you're rolling out or Domo program that you're rolling out, please feel free to contact me at jae@onyxreporting.com, and I would love to continue that conversation. All right, enough of that. Enjoy the video.
Yeah, so I'm Milan. I work as a analytics slash cloud guy, and part of that is also we do consultancy for Domo. We're on Domo platform. I work at a company called IIH Nordic. We're an analyst house based in Copenhagen. Yeah, and part of it is the part that I most work with is data warehousing, data lake building, and then visualizations on top of it. And that's how Domo came into our portfolio.
So do you do other platforms on top in addition to Domo, or is it just Domo?
No, we do other stuff and mostly lower level stuff, right? So a lot of the bare metal, builds. We are a Google company, so that means that we work in GCP mostly. But basically, like that's our area of expertise, and within that, the specialization is marketing, the martech, space.
Gotcha.
And actually, we found that Domo is a great tool for companies who who want to have like a more managed solution for this, especially when they want to connect a variety of data sources that are already natively available in Domo. So yeah, that's what I do.
Like, what would you say are the biggest wins on the Domo platform, and where are places that you find yourself struggling with?
For me, connectors is the biggest win. I think that's what clients find the most useful. That's what I find the most useful, and that's where the most value is, in my opinion. The fact that you can offload that and have it managed by Domo and have it up to a very good technical standard, right? I think that's the biggest part of it. And then, of course, bringing in the visualization aspect. I'm not working with that much hands-on. That's mostly, just a very consultancy oriented way of working with it and letting the customer explore it and really embrace it and make it their own, which they really enjoy. So that's also a big part of it. I think from if we are going to very large organizations, what's a little bit tricky sometimes is governance when Domo comes to other data sources. There's a little bit of a disconnect there, and you can make custom solutions to make that work. But
what do you mean by governance?
So governance in terms of, okay, let's say if you are using data that you originally pull in Domo and then use it in different parts of the organization, and you want to have certain aspects of that being sort of either bake in the business logic or whatever comes there. If there's a change in Domo, that's a little bit, it's too easy sometimes to make changes in Domo. which is fair. Like this is not a negative aspect in most cases, but sometimes if you encounter an organization big enough that that breaks a lot of stuff.
You mean this idea of integrating business or developing business logic in Domo, as well as you're supposed to maintain it in some other record of truth?
Exactly. Yes.
I see.
Yes. Yeah. And also the other aspect is, you can have an instance that quickly becomes a little bit polluted if you give too much, access for people to play around, and then it can get out of hand to, limit it back down to the most usable one and have that discovery only be done once. And then, you can just use it from there as a single source of truth.
And have you looked at the option of using either the write-back connector or framework as part of Integration Cloud to say, if I'm doing ETL in Domo, then I send it back to that source system, that center of truth?
Yeah, that's sort of a recurring theme, I think, and that's actually what I would, in most cases, suggest as well to customers if they have like an internal data lake. It's not in that sense, it's not going to you're going to duplicate data, which might be a little bit problematic at times, but at least that creates the connection between the part of the organization that manages Domo and the part that is responsible for that. And that way you just, you're forced to deal with it at one point. But what about you? I'm
not done. I still have the last idea I wanted to slide across the table. Obviously with Magic ETL, you get so much performance gain, so many opportunities by passing the development requirement away from the BI team or the report development team and over into like departmental data analysts.
Yeah.
Where I've seen success there is where we see smaller BI teams and reporting teams develop into like a center of excellence where these external parties are kind of, or departmental parties are developing their ETL. They get it to a place where they're happy with, they send it back to you and they're like, hey, we want this in production. And at that point you can say, okay, let's validate that these ETLs all make sense, that this idea that they've put together makes sense. And I can choose to promote that into the source of truth, whether it's a third party, an external data lake layer or another database layer. But the point being that like you're minimizing how much time you spend having to write SQL by handing the effort over to someone else for that first pass or second pass of work. Anyway, what about me?
No, I completely agree. And like that cannot be understated or overstated, actually, overstated how important, like discovering business insights is driving insights, which originate in most cases from, especially like in longer mature, clients. They always come from these, just like bottom up way. So yeah, it's definitely a big thing. And to be frank, most of the cases, as you said, like since the framework Magic ETL included is so robust and performant, in most cases you don't have to do like a complete re-architecture. Maybe you do a cleanup and then you can already promote it. So yeah, I'm 100% with you on that. That's
so cool. How long has the IIH Nordics kind of been?
IIH Nordic.
IIH Nordic.
IIH, yes.
Yeah. How long have you guys been working with Domo, and how, what percentage of your workload is Domo versus other?
Yeah. So we've been partnering with them, I think, for almost 2 years. Don't quote me on that.
I will. I promise.
Around that. Yeah. It's definitely not our main focus, but since we have more hardcore data analytics and like the technical background is definitely in the team, for us to move into a new tool is not about like you don't have to relearn that many things. One thing you have to read up on is optimization within their own frameworks, and that's actually why I contacted you about this, because you might have very expert knowledge on this particular topic, right?
Well, you did prepare a couple questions, so yeah, let's we'll call this J Q&A. I'll do my best.
Cool.
and then appreciate like all of the stuff I'm going to share with you is based off of my experience with Domo, and some of it has been validated by Domo engineers, but they can be a little bit secretive about how much they want the rest of the world to know about how their platform works, and so some of that stuff just isn't available, but I will do my best. So
sure,
hit me with your
I'm very happy to do that with you. Okay, perfect. Then let's jump right into it. Yeah, we're coming from a more data science background. So for us, it's second nature to start looking at performance or memory footprint or whatever optimization when it comes to the ETL side. But there's always, of course, the end user experience that we also have to keep in mind.
Yeah.
And when it comes to that is visualizations, cards, reports, dashboards, all that stuff within Domo. And one thing that that I ask myself sometimes is, where do I draw the line? Where do I move away from just optimizing the ETL, and where do I get into is there a different framework for thinking about what's best for the visual experience? Is there something we can do there?
In terms of optimizing card performance?
Exactly.
Yes. I mean, yes, there always are things you can do. Unfortunately, like I don't have like this is when you should start thinking about it. Usually it's wait till the customer feels pain. Terrible answer. But I mean, if you keep in mind that functionally Analyzer is translating your card into a SQL query that is then being run against a database, then all of the things that about optimizing query performance in a columnar database kind of apply, right? So if I can avoid, for example, doing a regex, doing too many regex expressions in my query, that can only help.
Yeah.
Avoiding doing things like count distinct, which every SQL developer will tell you, like count distinct is a very expensive calculation. So while it's fine on 100 million row data sets, when we start getting into billion row data sets, and I definitely have customers who have 4 billion row data sets that they're building cards on, that's where count distinct stops working as well. That's like the classic one. It's worth noting that you can do an approximate count distinct, is supported in beast modes, which will help with that, but it is an approximation. But when you get into billions of rows, who really cares about the exactly right number of count distincts? I think that's the hard part for the visualization folks to remember, is like at the end of the day, your query is going to a database. It is running a query. And Domo does have a lot of automated optimization going on under the covers in terms of creating projections and in terms of creating projections and generating statistics about how the data is being used. So that part's all automated. You as a developer don't have an opportunity to build indexes on the data set, for example. Domo automates that. I think the biggest thing that impacts performance, especially first thing in the morning when customers are coming into the data and when they're trying to look at their cards, is like, if I just ran my data flow, it's got the data is in a cold cache. And the database has a cold cache. The statistics haven't necessarily been generated. So for the first couple of minutes, as I go through my dashboards and Analyzer, that data should feel a little sluggish. And then it just gets snappier and snappier over time. Where we see that turning into a problem, though, is for the customers who are updating their dashboards multiple times a day. They're clearing the cache multiple times a day. So they're always querying a cold cache.
Okay. Just before we get more into the technical details, I think there was one thing that you mentioned, or just name drop, which is customer pain points. Yeah, there's obviously the case when the customer comes up and says, "Hey, this is way too slow," or we just feel that there could be something here that we can improve. does Domo provide, to my knowledge, I don't know, but maybe you know this better than I, Domo provide an easy to use way or easy to monitor way for developers, like how cars perform.
Like how average load time of a card.
Exactly.
Absolutely
Yeah.
not.
Yeah. Because
that would be asking too much.
Do you think it would be asking too much?
No, I don't.
No, you don't.
So it's okay. As a former employee of Domo, right? I'm supposed to say the product is amazing. As a person who has left Domo, I can also say the parts where they kind of could do better. I definitely think if you're going to tell customers that they have automated improvement, then if the improvements are not good enough, we need to have a way of making it better. And to your point, it would be nice if there were monitoring tools that would let you monitor query performance and all of that stuff. Domo's just never going to give you that.
Okay.
It's true. But you could talk to support. You can send a ticket to support and say, hey, this dashboard needs to be faster. And then Domo will do optimization activities, kind of not transparent. What's the opposite of transparent? Invisible to you. They can do optimization activities where they'll actually pull in a DBA and sit the DBA down and say, DBA, look at this dashboard, make it faster. And then tomorrow you'll come back and the experience is better. Okay. That said, you don't get to ask for that too many times, right? Because that is manual intervention from a DBA. So at that point, usually I'll tell customers, wait till your schema has stabilized, wait till you have your dashboard more or less set up, because you don't get to ask twice.
Of course. Yeah. Sure. Cool. Then let's move on to the next question. So you said that there are definitely things we can do. What would be the low-hanging fruits? Where would you point people, both technical and from, just a regular user? What should they do first?
When a customer hires me to help them with dashboard performance, one of the very first things that I'll set up are the beast mode Domo governance dataset and the pages and cards and dataset schema, so dataset details. And I'll use those three datasets to try to get to three very important questions. With the beast modes dataset, I'm looking at the beast modes for things that are dumb, decisions that I can move either upstream or queries that I just know are never going to be great. Like I was saying, count distinct, always going to be painful no matter what. If I see you doing a lot of case, when this, then that, when this, then that. If I see a lot of case statements, yes, the database layer will do a very good job with that. But if you're using a like instead of an equals, for example, or if you're doing regex expressions, if I can move that upstream into ETL, then I'll move that upstream into ETL so that my query doesn't have to evaluate that when you're running your queries.
Yeah.
So cool. I'm looking at beast modes to say, what can I move upstream? And am I doing common sense things? When people start using window functions, the window functions implementation in Domo, I think could be a lot stronger. I'll just say it. I'm the biggest fan. I do all of my tutorial videos are about window functions. I'm the biggest fan, but I think it could be stronger. And window functions they're just expensive. We know that.
Yeah.
So those are places where I'll say to the customer, I'm sorry, based off of what you've given us, there's only so much we can do here. So those are beast modes, check. In terms of card performance, another super easy thing you can do is like if I have a column called date and it's date time. If you only care about date, have a column that's just date, because the number of distinct values in date time versus date, there's 1,440, is that right? 1,440 seconds in a day or whatever that number is, right? That's a much more granular data set, much more high cardinality, number of distinct values, much higher cardinality data set. And that, of course, will affect the database's ability to index it. So if I can have date instead of date time, there's something that I might look at over there. And then the last one was about if I have a dashboard, I can use the dataset pages and cards to see all the cards shared on that dashboard. And then I can use the cards dataset to see the dataset that powers the card.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can use the dataset schema to see the schema of the dataset in that card. And what I'm getting to is I'm trying to figure out which fields are actually being used in that dashboard. You know, customers, when you're building an ETL, you're like, hey, what columns do you need? Oh, we need everything. And a customer that had a 200 column data set, 4 billion rows. And they're like, why is it so slow? I'm like, well, okay, come on, help me out here. And I said, what columns do you need? Let's just cut down the data set. They said, I need everything. I said, well, you're actually only using 38 columns in your cards. And 10 of the 38 columns are only used once. So I built them a version of the data set that just had 10 columns, the 10 most used columns, that was good for 50% of the cards on the dashboard. And then I had a secondary data set that had more columns, and we only used that secondary data set as a drill through.
Mm.
So not everyone knows this, but if I have one card in Analyzer that I create a drill path, I can drill through to a different data set.
Okay, cool.
So not only could I have a card, a data set that has fewer columns, I could also aggregate the top level data set. If I know everything on the dashboard is aggregated to the month, for example, I could pre-aggregate all of the data to the month level, assuming I still have the functionality I desire. And now my data set goes from several billion rows to a couple 100 million, or even a couple million. That's going to be much faster performance when I'm browsing the dashboard. And then I only go to the high granularity data set on the drill through. And because Domo is passing filters, it's not 4 billion rows, it's just that filtered view of the data. Yeah. So it's another way where I can design my dashboard in a way that consumes less data. And I can use the Domo governance data sets to make sure I'm providing the data sets that are the most, that have the fewest number of columns, and helps me scale with volume.
Yeah, that's cool. We jumped a little bit ahead of ourselves, because now we are getting into the very much, I think, the most, like complex implementation that you can have. But yeah. Big data sets merit it. So fair enough. Another big question that comes up time and time again is views versus data sets, materializing or not materializing. What is your opinion in terms of best practice from a visualization perspective?
Yeah.
If there's any.
I definitely would say use them. I definitely recommend the use of dataset views. And I'll do things like use a view as a semantic layer where I can like rename columns to a friendly name that makes sense to the business. Or I'll use views to like swap in and out different data sets. If I'm going from V1 of a data set to a V2 of the data set, but I want to keep the same column names, use that data set view in the middle. Or, and this is on the data processing side, which isn't quite what you were asking about, but we'll get there in a second. If I have to join a fact table to a dimension table, do that in a data set view because it's in Adrenaline, the performance is virtually instantaneous, as opposed to doing that join in ETL. Because the joins in ETL will take longer. And if for whatever reason I want to add a new column in my dimensional table or change a roll up or some hierarchy, right? Now I have to reprocess the entire ETL versus the dataset view, which should be almost instantaneous.
Okay.
So the short answer is yes, use dataset views.
Okay.
With regards to card performance, still use dataset views. And if it's too painful, then I send an email to support and say, hey, I'm trying to use this feature that you want me to use, make it faster.
Okay, cool. So I have a question regarding views and caching.
Okay.
So let's say you have a card that 1,000 employees at the same time concurrently view. and it's powered by the view, am I gonna experience any performance, drop because it's a view and not a data set? And I don't know how caching is involved in all that.
Will you have performance drop? Well, you're still it's still a database, right? So I'm still have 1,000 concurrent users querying the same data set, whether it's a view or a data set. There will be an impact. There must be an impact. That's just physics. Can Domo make it less painful under the covers by, whatever optimizations they can do? Probably. At that point, I would just send it back to Domo and say, hey, I'm getting bad performance. Can you make it better? From that kind of perspective, we don't have a lot of options in terms of optimization. Domo doesn't give us the tools. So we have to rely on support. Support will turn to their DBA engineers and they will make magic happen for us.
Cool. But just to nerd out for a second, it probably doesn't make any big difference. But we were talking at the beginning about how you have a cold cache for your on top of your data sets when you first make them whenever or refresh them. Does the same happen for views? Or since views are just views in the very traditional sense, they're not going to be cached at all?
I can't speak to that. I don't know whether or not Domo implements caching for views.
Okay, cool.
It could,
No, it's fine.
They totally could. What I can speak to is Domo doesn't talk about it often, but if you think about an adrenaline data flow, right? Adrenaline data flows functionally are the ability to create a data flow where I'm defining SQL that ultimately turns into a data set at the end of the day, right? So if you think about it, in adrenaline data flows, we must be creating views, and those views eventually become materialized, i.e. stored in Vault.
Yeah.
So there's a button somewhere where I can say, take that view and turn it into a physical data set stored in Vault. Materialize the data. There's a button that exists. Domo doesn't really want us to talk about it too much because materialization may or may not be the best optimization route for them. There might be other things that can be done, but it exists.
Sure.
So
yeah, but I completely agree with you what you said before, that once you're at that point that it becomes this big of a challenge to get some performance gains, this is not the way. The way is to reach out to support and see if they can do custom tuning of how the database is queried on that.
Again, they'll ask us to do the common sense things. They'll ask us, hey, are you joining on a text column? Could you join on an integer column? Because that will be more performant. Are you pre-aggregating your data? Is it possible to pre-aggregate your data? As smart people who understand how SQL works, it's kind of our responsibility as consultants to make sure people are doing the common sense optimizations that they could be doing. And then we turn it over to support. So I do, like I said, that's why I'm pulling in all of these governance data sets to help in that initial assessment.
All right. And if we moved away a little bit from visualizations to back to ETL, is there any role that cache plays in particular that you can leverage to either make your processes run faster, or that's something that you should never even think about?
It's something you shouldn't really think about.
Okay.
There's not keep in mind that the data flows are not running in a SQL database. MySQL and Redshift obviously are running in SQL databases. But if I think about the data has to leave either Adrenaline or Vault, so either the flat file storage or the database layer, and it has to be pulled into the data transformation engine, whichever one it is. That process of moving it from point A to point B, as I understand it, will be more impacted by, I'm leaving I'm leaving Domo's sweet bosom, right? More so than I've cached the data in Adrenaline. Like,
yeah,
I'm obviously not the backend engineer, but like of all of the things making the biggest difference, what you should and can look at are questions like, hey, if I know that my very first step in ETL is to filter to the data to last 7 days, for example, instead of transferring the entire history of the data set, build a data set view that's filtered to 7 days. So now instead of moving 50 million rows, I'm only moving 20 million rows or 10 million rows. Cut down the data.
Yeah.
If you can, and if it's not too much effort, cut down the number of columns. I never do that, but I'll definitely try to build a view that will cut down the number of rows that I'm moving. Or alternatively, if I know my first step in ETL is to do a group by clause, which you should never do in ETL. Don't aggregate your data. But if that's your first step, right? Do that in a data set view before you move it.
Yeah.
So
cool.
Where I think the biggest gains are is one, use Magic 2.0 when you can, because it will always be faster than MySQL and Redshift, and use dataset views as inputs to do the expensive transforms like filtering, group by, ranking, or joins. Do those in views before you pull it into ETL, because the database layer will do that faster.
Okay. All right. And then just to reiterate one thing from the very beginning of what you said is beast modes, try to, if expensive, try to move it upstream so it doesn't happen on a card level.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right. So I think we pretty much covered the hierarchy in terms of how one should approach this performance issue.
Yeah.
So from that, I think it's a quite nice thing, and especially when you take into considerations how Domo is actually doing so much optimization in the background to begin with. Like as you said, like until you get to a couple of billion rows, you don't really start to notice any of these performance drops. So they are doing a good enough job at keeping you
good enough
busy.
Oh, get out of here! Get out! Good enough. You know what's really funny? When I started working at Domo with my fellow coworker, I won't name him Jamie. Jamie, I won't name you. But we were working on a problem, and he's like, "My God, Jay, this MySQL data flow is so slow. What's going on here?" And I was like, "Oh, did you put on an index?" He's like, "Oh yeah, I guess."
What?
I totally hadn't thought of that. No, he had a background in SQL development, so he was like, "Oh yeah, obviously." But one of the really powerful things about Domo is like at all parts of the platform, it's doing optimization for us so that we don't have to think about these things.
Yeah.
And there was this other customer I was working with. They were like, we have to do everything in Redshift. I'm like, why do you have to do it in Redshift? Because Redshift is faster than MySQL. I'm like, well, you have 50,000 row data sets. That shouldn't be true. They weren't using indexes because they didn't know about indexes. And I think that's not throwing shade at anyone. That's just speaking to how much Domo trivializes a lot of the like optimization stuff that folks like you and I are used to having to do in other systems, but Domo automates a lot of that. It is a bit of a double-edged sword though, because now that I can't do any optimization, now I have to use support anytime something isn't fast enough, which, you know, we all have mixed feelings about. So
sure. And I think for me, at least at the beginning, what was a little bit of something that I had to consciously keep an eye out for is not to try, like not to be fooled by, you know, these very simple names of Magic ETL and then seeing that I can do the same in Redshift. Maybe that's going to be so much more performant because it's just in the context, it performs in a very different way. And since there's less transparency, you just have to sort of trust it at the beginning, do your own experiments, figure out how much you can rely on it. And then once it's proven, then you can, you know, start using it comfortably. But if someone just starts out with it, then definitely try to keep as much as you can within these native tools.
Yeah.
Because in most cases, that's going to be just lightning fast compared to everything else you can do.
I think Darren would have my hide if I let us say that MySQL and Redshift are not native Domo tools. I mean, Magic is definitely where most of the investment is going right now in terms of making it better, faster, stronger, because they want customers to use it. I wouldn't say that MySQL and Redshift are not native Domo tools. I would just frame it as MySQL is the future. But also as a consultant, like from one consultant to another, when I was starting at Domo, I was of the mindset, I was like, I want to write my own SQL because I know how SQL works. I can tune SQL. And my client or my coworker who had been at Domo for longer than me. They were like, well, Jay, you might know SQL, but what happens when you try to give it back to the business? When you try to give it back to the business, they're not trying to read your SQL code. And if they need to refactor the work that you've done, you're creating a non-trivial barrier to engagement by forcing a business analyst to read SQL.
Yeah.
So more and more, I tell people out of the box, unless you know Magic can't do the ETL that you need, you should always do it in MySQL first or in Magic first. Unless you know it won't work, do it in Magic, because it makes it easier for someone else to refactor your code.
Yeah, and not just that, but as you said, like just it promotes future iterations to happen internally in that organization. So yeah, it's all around the win. A little bit might be like if we talked a little bit about where Domo is falling short and stuff. For me, Magic ETL, my only concern about it is versioning. It's like the UI within the UI, it's easy to manage, but when you have complex ETLs, and there are breaking changes somewhere, you want to have a little bit of a, I know, more programmatic way of interacting with it, but maybe it's just my practices that do not fit.
No. I mean, I think you're on the right path. Like if I have a chunk of code that from 5 versions ago that was still good, it is relatively obtuse or difficult to go back, get that chunk, and then put it back into the current version of my ETL. That's more clicks than we want it to be. It would be great if, the developers were like, okay, let's see how GitHub works with branching and all of that. Let's put that into the product. I would love it if they did that. I believe, but cannot speak for the company. I believe it's something that they are actively working on. So that would be and will be amazing. That said, in terms of best practices, though, I do tell people, like, divide your ETL into layers, right? And at the conference, I talked about having that kind of intermediate level data flow that does the minimum amount of transformation possible to create a usable data set. And then having a dashboard ETL layer where you're combining kind of staged data into dashboard specific visualizations or dashboard specific data sets. With this model, yes, the pipeline takes a little bit longer as I read and write the data set twice. From the code management perspective and the recyclability of my data sets perspective, I think it creates a better user experience because I can recycle my code, can use the same data set in multiple dashboards. And if I change the definition of what it is to be a valid row or a whatever binary flag I have set up, I only have to change it one place instead of changing it multiple times.
Cool. Just one last question to close this up, because I have a bit of a beef with you on this layering.
Go.
Why don't you use labels instead of just trying to force a naming convention on
Why don't I use
on the
tags,
receiving client? Exactly. Yeah.
I love the tags feature and I loved it when it came out. I don't love where it's at right now in the product. So for example, the big reason why I don't use it and will not use it until they fix this is there is no data set in Domo that will give you the name of a data set and all of the tags associated with it at the data set level. And if I can't report on it in Domo governance, what are we doing here? So that's
okay. Fair enough.
I definitely you know, in my dream of dreams, and maybe you've got some Python guy that wants to do this, if we could auto tag data sets, like the source data set has been tagged PII. I want every downstream data set to have PII on it. Because I know that it came from a data set that had PII and I need to apply PDP. If and as Domo starts integrating tagging more into the platform, then I see there being fewer barriers to use. But for right now, for the average customer, they're not going to crack open PyDomo and get started with APIs and automation. So the easiest way to get started right now is through naming convention.
Sure is.
And then also, no, I mean, I think that's it. In a nutshell,
Yeah,
that's it.
that.
Like, I was the hugest
plenty good.
proponent of tagging when it first came out, but when it didn't align with how we wanted it to be, like where we want it to be, the reportability wasn't there. I couldn't recommend it.
Sure. But I'm sure that's something on the roadmap. So we'll just wait and
tagging
see.
came out 2 years ago, so it's not that I'm holding my breath. No, I mean, for the organizations that have someone like you who can do this in an automated way and in a scalable way, absolutely run with it. It's a great feature. But until it's better integrated into the UI, I think naming convention will be easier for end users.
Sure. Yeah, when they read it, not when they start to make their own data sets and they get confused.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's fine. Yeah, I understand your point. That makes complete sense. So yeah, sure. Cool. Is there anything that you that we should discuss? You think something worth mentioning regarding this topic? That
I want to have
raised?
this conversation more often. So we're gonna have to do this, like collect all of your beefs. I think this has been a really fun session, and like we're talking about things that don't get out there as much as they could. So I was very happy to take the time and do this with you. And yeah, let's do it again.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's been amazing.